The sound wasn't a slap. It was a dull, sickening thud, the sound of a boot connecting with fragile ribs. Alara Moonstone didn't scream. Omegas learned early that silence was the only shield that held. She crumpled against the cold marble of the corridor, the silver tray of wine shattering around her like her own fracturing hope. "Look at you," Prince Valerius sneered, his voice dripping with inherited arrogance but none of the earned power. "Pathetic. You stain the floor just by existing." He drew his leg back for a second strike. Then, the air vanished. The torches didn't flicker. They bowed. The temperature in the hallway plummeted to freezing, carrying the scent of ozone in terrified silence. Valerius froze, his foot hovering. He didn't need to turn around to know who stood behind him. The shadow that fell over them was heavier than night. The Alpha King had arrived. The Obsidian Palace was a monument to strength, carved from the black volcanic rock of the Storm Mountains. It was a place where weakness was not just despised, it was often fatal. Alara Moonstone knew this better than anyone. As an Omega, the lowest of the low, a wolf with no bite and a spirit meant to kneel, she was invisible. She was the ghost that scrubbed the floors, the shadow that poured the wine, the silence in a room full of roaring beasts. But today, invisibility had failed her. It was the day of the winter solstice feast, and tension hummed through the palace corridors like a plucked wire. King Caspian Storm, the alpha of alphas, a man whose name stopped wars and started storms, had returned from the borderlands. The court was walking on eggshells, and his son, Prince Valerius, was unraveling. Valerius was 19, handsome in a sharp, cruel way, with his father's dark hair, but none of his father's stoic discipline. He was a prince who ruled through fear because he lacked respect. And he had caught Alara dusting the portrait of the late queen, a woman Alara had never met, but whose eyes in the painting always seemed to weep. "I told you," Valerius hissed, his face flushed with wine and misplaced rage, "that no filth is to touch her image." "I was only cleaning the frame, Your Highness," Alara whispered, clutching her side where his boot had landed. Pain bloomed there, hot and sharp, stealing her breath. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the jagged shards of the crystal decanter she had dropped when he struck her. "Please, I meant no disrespect." "Your existence is disrespect," Valerius shouted, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The few courtiers nearby stopped, watching with morbid fascination. None intervened. To intervene for an Omega was social suicide. Valerius, emboldened by the audience, stepped forward. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed the way she curled in on herself, small and helpless. It made him feel big. It made him feel like the alpha he was struggling to become. "You are a blight on this house," Valerius spat. "Maybe if I break you, the rest of the rats will learn their place." He raised his boot again, aiming for her head this time. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the dark. She didn't pray to the moon goddess. The goddess had forgotten her long ago, but the blow never came. Instead, a sound vibrated through the floorboards, a low, resonant growl that wasn't human. It was the sound of tectonic plates shifting, of a predator so large it didn't need to roar to be heard. The atmosphere in the corridor grew heavy, pressurized, as if they were suddenly deep underwater. The courtiers dropped to their knees, heads bowed low. Even the air seemed to obey the newcomer. Valerius stood paralyzed, his foot still raised, trembling now. "Put your foot down, boy," a voice said. It wasn't shouted. It was spoken with the terrifying calm of a man holding a leash on a hurricane. Valerius lowered his leg, turning slowly. Standing at the end of the hall was Caspian Storm. He was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and imposing, wearing a long coat of dark fur and leather that smelled of the wild winter woods. His hair was black as pitch, streaked prematurely with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a storm-tossed sea, churning with a violence that made the soul shiver. Caspian didn't look at his son. He looked past him, down at the girl bleeding amidst the broken glass and spilled wine. "Father," Valerius started, his voice cracking. "She was defiling mothers." Silence. The word hit Valerius like a physical blow. The prince flinched. Caspian began to walk. His boots made no sound on the stone. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf closing in on a wounded deer. He stopped 3 feet from them. The sheer aura of power radiating from him, the Alpha command, forced Alara to flatten herself further against the floor, her wolf whimpering in the back of her mind. Caspian looked at his son. "You struck a servant." "She is an Omega," Valerius scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "She is nothing. I was disciplining her." "You were kicking a woman who was already down," Caspian corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "You were displaying weakness." "Weakness?" Valerius's face twisted. "I was showing strength. I was showing them that we do not tolerate." "Strength," Caspian interrupted, "is restraint. Strength is protection. What you showed—" Caspian finally looked at his son, his eyes narrowing. Was the tantrum of a child who fears he will never be a man. Valerius went pale. The insult cut deeper than any blade. "Pick her up," Caspian ordered. Valerius blinked. "What?" "Pick her up." The command was laced with alpha power. Valerius's knees buckled under the weight of it, his pride warred with his instinct to submit, his face turning a blotchy red. "I will not touch that filth," Valerius whispered, defiance trembling in his jaw. Caspian stared at him for a long, agonizing second. "Then you are not fit to lead them." The king stepped forward, bypassing his son entirely. He knelt. The entire hallway gasped. The Alpha King, the scourge of the North, the man who had killed 1,000 rogues, was kneeling in spilled wine and glass. Caspian reached out. His hands were large, scarred from years of battle, but his touch was shockingly gentle as he slid one arm under Alara's shoulders and the other under her knees. Alara flinched, her eyes flying open. She looked up, expecting to see disgust. Instead, she saw a storm held in check. "Easy," he murmured, the rumble of his chest vibrating against her. He lifted her effortlessly, standing up with her cradled in his arms like she weighed nothing more than a feather. Blood from her side stained his expensive coat, but he didn't even blink. He turned to Valerius, who looked as if he had been slapped. "Go to your chambers," Caspian said, his voice cold enough to freeze hell. "Do not leave them until I decide if you are still my heir." The silence that followed was deafening. The journey to the royal wing was a blur of terrified whispers and the rhythmic thud of the king's heartbeat against Alara's ear. She was trembling uncontrollably, partly from the shock of the injury, but mostly from the terrifying proximity to the most dangerous creature on the continent. Caspian didn't take her to the servants' infirmary. He walked past the grand staircases, past the shocked guards who scrambled to open doors, straight into the heart of the palace, his private quarters. "My lord," Alara rasped, her voice thin, You can put me down. I will stain your floors." Caspian didn't look down, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "The floors can be washed. Broken ribs cannot be walked on." "But I am an Omega," she insisted, panic rising. Being this close to the king was forbidden. It broke a dozen laws of their hierarchy. "I am not permitted in the Alpha's wing." "I am the king," Caspian said simply. "I decide where you are permitted." He kicked open the door to a sprawling chamber, dominated by a massive fireplace and a bed large enough to sleep a small family. He laid her down on the velvet coverlet, silver and blue, the colors of his house. Alara tried to scramble off. No, this is your bed. I cannot." "Stay," he commanded. It wasn't the crushing weight of the Alpha voice, but a firm order. She froze. Caspian turned and walked to a basin of water, dipping a cloth into it. He returned, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. Up close, he was overwhelming. The scent of him, rain, pine, and raw, potent power, flooded her senses. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "Where does it hurt?" he asked. "My side," she whispered. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the hem of her rough gray tunic. "May I?" He was asking permission. The king was asking an Omega for permission. Alara was so stunned she could only nod. He lifted the shirt gently. Her side was already turning a horrific shade of purple and black. Caspian's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. His eyes flashed a dangerous glowing amber before returning to storm gray. "He broke 2 ribs, Caspian diagnosed, his voice tight. "Perhaps 3. He pressed the cool, wet cloth against her skin. Alara hissed, arching her back. I know, he soothed. I know. He began to clean the blood from where the glass had cut her arm. As he worked, Alara watched him. He looked tired. Up close, she could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the gray hairs in his beard. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. Why? She asked. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Caspian paused, the cloth resting on her arm. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He saw eyes the color of violets, rare, startlingly bright against her pale skin. He saw a chin that held a defiant tilt, despite her fear. Why what? Why help me? Alara swallowed hard. Prince Valerius, he was right. In the eyes of the law, I am nothing. You humiliated your heir for a maid. Caspian resumed cleaning the wound, his movements methodical. Valerius thinks power is the ability to crush those smaller than you. He is mistaken. That is not power, that is tyranny. And I will not have a tyrant succeed me. He tossed the cloth into the basin. And you are not nothing. He looked back at her, his gaze intensifying. When I entered the hall, you didn't cry out. You didn't beg. You took the blow and you stayed silent. Most grown men in my legion would have screamed. Screaming doesn't stop the boot, Alara said quietly. It only encourages the kicker. Caspian froze. He stared at her, something shifting in his expression, a flicker of recognition, of respect. Who are you? He asked softly. You possess a dignity that does not belong in a scullery. I am Alara Moonstone, she said. The name landed between them like a dropped stone. Caspian's eyes widened slightly. Moonstone. That is the name of the Northern Pack, the pack that was wiped out in the Great War 10 years ago. My parents were betas of that pack, Alara lied. It was a practiced lie, one she had told 1,000 times to hide the truth of her lineage. They died protecting the border. I was taken in as a ward of the state. Caspian studied her face, searching for a lie. His wolf stirred within him, a restless, prowling sensation he hadn't felt in years. There was something about her scent, under the smell of cheap soap and old dust. There was something sweet, something like winter jasmine and smoke. It was a scent that tugged at the primitive part of his brain. Rest, Caspian said abruptly, standing up. The proximity was becoming dangerous. He needed to think. The physician will be here shortly. You will remain here until you are healed. Here? In the king's bed? Alara looked horrified. In the guest chambers adjoining mine, he corrected, though he had briefly considered keeping her exactly where she was. The thought disturbed him. Do not try to leave, Alara Moonstone. My guards have orders to keep you safe, even from yourself. He turned to leave, his coat swirling around his ankles. Your Majesty? Caspian paused at the door. Thank you. He didn't look back. Don't thank me yet. Valerius is vindictive. By saving you, I have painted a target on your back larger than the one you already wore. He walked out, the heavy oak door clicking shut, leaving Alara alone in a room that smelled like him, wrapped in sheets that smelled like him, her heart hammering a rhythm she couldn't understand. News traveled through the Obsidian Palace faster than fire in a drought. By dinner, everyone knew. The king had struck down the prince. The king had carried the Omega. The king had put her in the royal wing. The court was in chaos. In the royal library, Caspian stood by the window, swirling a glass of amber whiskey. The storm outside battered the glass, mirroring the turmoil in his mind. He had expected to feel anger toward Valerius, and he did. The boy was spoiled, cruel, and lacked the temperament to rule. But what Caspian hadn't expected was the obsession that had taken root in his chest the moment he touched the girl. It wasn't just lust. Caspian was a man of discipline. He could control lust. This was different. It was a magnetic pull, a biological imperative that made his skin itch when he was away from her. She is an Omega, he muttered to the empty room. She is a child compared to you. She's a servant. Foul. She smells like home, his wolf whispered back, a guttural sound in his psyche. The door creaked open. It was Marcus, his beta and oldest friend. Marcus looked weary. The council's asking questions, Caspian, Marcus said, closing the door. They say you've shamed Valerius publicly. They say you're keeping a servant in the noble quarters. Lord Vane is suggesting you've gone mad with grief over the anniversary. The anniversary. The death of his wife, Queen Seraphina, 15 years ago. Caspian turned, his eyes hard. Let them talk. Valerius needed to be shamed. He was acting like a rogue, not a prince. And the girl, Marcus asked carefully. The girl was injured. I showed Mercy. Mercy is sending her to the infirmary with a bag of gold, Marcus countered. Mercy is not putting her in the Azure suite and assigning 2 royal guards to her door. That is not mercy, Caspian. That is claiming. Caspian slammed his glass down on the table. I have not claimed her. Your wolf has, Marcus challenged. I can smell it on you. You reek of protectiveness. If I didn't know better, I'd say... Say what? Caspian growled, his voice dropping into the warning zone. I'd say you found a mate. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. She is an Omega, Caspian said icily. Alphas of my bloodline do not mate with Omegas. It is biologically impossible. We would crush them. Our power is too great. Myths, Marcus shrugged. Old wives' tales to keep the bloodlines pure. But you can't deny the pull. Caspian turned back to the window. He couldn't deny it, but he wouldn't accept it. A king could not mate with a maid. It would destabilize the entire region. The Pax would revolt. Valerius would use it to launch a coup. Ensure she is fed, Caspian said, dismissing the topic, and tell Valerius that if he approaches her wing, I will break his legs myself. Meanwhile, in the Azure suite, Alara was not resting. She was pacing. The pain in her ribs had dulled to a throb, thanks to the potent salves the physician had applied, but her anxiety was sharper than ever. She felt exposed. The silk nightgown they had dressed her in felt like a costume. The soft bed felt like a trap. She walked to the mirror. The bruise on her cheek was blooming, ugly and dark. But her eyes, there was a strange light in them. She touched the silver locket she wore hidden beneath her clothes, the only thing she had left of her mother. Stay hidden, little star, her mother had whispered before hiding her in the cellar while the fires burned above. Stay small, stay silent. If they know what you are, they will kill you. Alara Moonstone wasn't just an Omega. That was the lie that kept her alive. She closed her eyes and focused. Deep inside, buried under layers of suppression and fear, she felt it. A hum of power, not the brute force of an alpha, but something ancient, something rare. She wasn't a normal Omega. She was a silver Omega, a conduit for the moon goddess's own magic, a healer, a seer, a prize that alphas would start wars to possess. And King Caspian had just brought her into the center of the spotlight. A noise at the balcony door made her freeze. It was on the 3rd floor, a sheer drop to the cliffs below. No one should be there. The handle turned. Alara backed away, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. The door opened, letting in a swirl of snow and wind. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in black. It wasn't Valerius. The figure was too slight, too agile. The assassin pulled back a hood to reveal a woman with a scar running through her left eye. She held a dagger that curved like a crescent moon, made of silver. The prince sends his regards, the woman whispered. Alara's back hit the wall. She was trapped. She opened her mouth to scream, but the woman moved with supernatural speed, a hand clapping over Alara's mouth, the dagger raised. But before the blade could descend, the door to the hallway exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel. Caspian stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing a solid, terrifying gold. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a monster unleashed. "Drop it," he roared. The sound wasn't just a voice. It was a physical shockwave. The windows shattered. The assassin was thrown backward as if hit by a cannon, slamming into the stone wall. Alara collapsed to her knees, the pressure of his alpha aura crushing the air from her lungs. Caspian was across the room in a blur. He didn't check the assassin. He went straight to Alara, dropping to his knees, his hands frantically searching her for wounds. "Did she touch you?" he demanded, his voice ragged, frantic. "Did she cut you?" "No," Alara gasped, trembling violently. I'm okay." Caspian pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself. And in that moment of terror and adrenaline, the barrier broke. Caspian froze. His body went rigid against hers. He pulled back, staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. The adrenaline had stripped away his control, stripped away her scent blockers. He could smell her truly now, not just jasmine and smoke. He smelled winter stars. He smelled destiny. "Mine," he breathed, the words slipping out without his permission. Alara stared at him, her heart stopping. The assassin groaned in the corner, trying to rise. Caspian didn't even look at her. He raised one hand, and a bolt of pure lightning, mythic elemental power, crackled from his fingertips, pinning the assassin to the wall without touching her. Caspian Storm was not just a werewolf. He was an elemental, and he had just found the one thing he would burn the world down to keep. "Guard!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the foundations of the palace. "Seal the wing! We are under attack!" He looked back at Alara, his eyes burning with a terrifying possessiveness. "No one touches you," he swore, his voice a dark vow. "Not my son, not the assassins, not the gods themselves." Alara looked at the man who held her. She had been saved, yes, but looking into the golden fire of his eyes, she realized she had traded one danger for another. The king hadn't just saved a maid. He had found his queen, and the kingdom was going to bleed for it. The air in the Azure suite smelled of ozone and scorched stone. The assassin, pinned to the wall by arcs of crackling electricity, had passed out from the sheer pressure of King Caspian's aura. Caspian stood over Alara, his chest heaving. The golden light in his eyes slowly receded, fading back to the stormy gray of the North Sea, but the intensity remained. He looked at his hands, hands that had just summoned lightning inside his own home, and then at the girl, trembling in the center of the room. "Mine." The word still echoed in the silence, heavy and absolute. Alara pulled her knees to her chest, her violet eyes wide. "Your Majesty, what did you say?" Caspian stiffened. The rational part of his brain, the king who had ruled for 20 years with iron logic, was trying to wrestle control back from the wolf. He turned away sharply, unable to look at her without feeling that magnetic, terrifying pull. "I said you are under my protection," Caspian lied, his voice gravelly. "Guards." The doors burst open again. A squad of elite guards, armored in black steel, rushed in, weapons drawn. They skid to a halt at the sight of the assassin levitating against the wall, held by lingering static, and their king standing amidst shattered glass. "Take this filth to the dungeons," Caspian ordered, pointing at the unconscious woman. "If she dies before I question her, you all die." "Yes, sire." 2 guards dragged the woman away. "And you," Caspian pointed to the captain of the guard. "Double the perimeter. No one enters this wing. Not the council, not the servants, and especially not my son." The captain paled, but saluted. "As you command." When they were gone, silence returned, thicker than before. Caspian walked to the shattered balcony doors. The winter wind howled in, biting and cold, but he didn't seem to feel it. He waved a hand, and the wind suddenly died, the air forming a pressurized barrier to seal the room. Alara watched him, awestruck. You control the elements." Caspian didn't turn. "The storm bloodline is old. We do not just rule the land, we are the land." He paused, his shoulders tense. "Alara." "Yes?" "Forget what you heard." He turned finally, his expression unreadable, a mask of stone. "In the heat of battle, instincts flare. Do not mistake adrenaline for destiny." Alara felt a sharp pang in her chest. Rejection or protection, she wasn't sure. "Of course, Your Majesty, I'm just a maid." "You're no longer a maid," he said darkly. "Maids are not targeted by elite assassins. You are a piece on the board now, Alara, and I need to know why Valerius is so terrified of you that he tried to silence you permanently." "He hates me because I saw him weak," Alara whispered, "because I didn't beg." "Valerius is cruel, but he is not stupid." Caspian paced the room, the energy radiating off him making the hair on Alara's arms stand up. "He wouldn't risk execution for petty spite. There is something else, something about you." He stopped in front of her. The proximity made her breath hitch. The scent of him, rain and pine, was overwhelming, drugging her senses. "What aren't you telling me, Alara Moonstone?" Alara gripped her locket tight beneath her tunic. If he knew she was a silver Omega, he would lock her away forever. Or worse, he would use her. Kings always used weapons, and she was the ultimate weapon. "I have told you the truth, sire," she lied, looking him in the eye. "I am nobody." Caspian stared at her. His wolf growled, "Liar, mate, ours." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. For a moment she thought he would kiss her. The air between them crackled, hot and electric. "We shall see," he murmured. "Rest. Tomorrow you enter the Viper's Pit." "The Viper's Pit?" "The High Council." Caspian straightened, the mask of the king sliding back into place. "They want answers, and I'm going to give them a show." The Grand Council chamber was a circular amphitheater of black marble, designed to intimidate. It was filled to capacity. The high lords of the 12 territories sat in tiered rows, their whispers sounding like the rustling of dry leaves. At the center stood Prince Valerius. He looked impeccable in a suit of midnight blue, his arm in a sling, a dramatic touch considering Caspian hadn't actually broken his arm, only bruised his ego. "My lords," Valerius projected his voice smooth and practiced, "my father is unwell. The grief of the solstice has clouded his mind. He attacks his own kin. He harbors a lowly servant in the royal wing. Is this the stability the kingdom needs?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Lord Vane, a snake of a man with pale eyes, stood up. "The prince speaks with concern," Vane said oily. "King Caspian's behavior is erratic. Perhaps a temporary regency is in order until the king recovers. Is that so?" The doors at the top of the amphitheater didn't open. They were blown off their hinges. King Caspian strode in. He wore full ceremonial armor, black steel etched with silver runes, and a cloak that billowed like smoke. But what silenced the room wasn't his armor. It was who walked beside him. Alara. She wasn't wearing a maid's rags. She was dressed in a gown of deep violet velvet, high-collared and long-sleeved, tailored to hide her bandages but accentuate her grace. Her hair was braided with silver thread. She looked terrified, but she walked with her head high, flanked by two of Caspian's most terrifying personal guards. Caspian descended the stairs, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. He didn't stop until he reached the center, standing toe-to-toe with his son. "You speak of stability, Valerius?" Caspian's voice was calm, which made it terrifying. "While you pay assassins to murder women in their sleep?" The room gasped. Valerius's eyes darted around. "Lies! The king is delirious!" "Bring her in," Caspian commanded. From the shadows, the captain of the guard dragged the assassin. She was battered, bound in chains, and very much awake. "Speak," Caspian ordered. "The prince," the assassin rasped, spitting blood. "He paid me 5,000 gold pieces. He said the girl knew too much. He said she smelled wrong." Valerius turned purple. "She is a hired liar. Father, this is madness. You shame our house for a floor scrubber." "This floor scrubber," Caspian placed a hand on the small of Alara's back, a possessive gesture that sent a shockwave through the bond, "is under my personal protection. An attack on her is an attack on the crown." Lord Vane scoffed. "With all due respect, sire, she is an Omega. The law states Omegas have no standing in court. You cannot upend centuries of tradition because you have taken a fancy to a servant." "Tradition?" Caspian laughed, a dark, humorless sound. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Frost began to creep up the marble pillars. "I am the storm. I am the alpha of alphas. I am the tradition." He turned to the council, his eyes glowing faintly. "Valerius is stripped of his command. He is confined to the East Tower until I deem him fit to walk among men." "You can't do this!" Valerius screamed, his mask crumbling. "I am your heir!" "You are a disappointment," Caspian said coldly. "Guards, take him." As Valerius was dragged away, screaming curses, Caspian turned to Alara. He saw her trembling, her eyes wide with shock at the brutality of his world. He leaned down, whispering so only she could hear. Do not look down. Do not let them see you bleed. If you fall now, they will eat you alive." Alara straightened her spine. She looked at Lord Vane, who was staring at her with predatory calculation. She didn't flinch. "I am ready, Your Majesty," she whispered back. Caspian looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the pride in his chest was so strong it almost knocked him over. She was made of steel, this girl. But as they turned to leave, a sudden high-pitched ringing filled the air. A magical ward near the entrance shattered. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the upper tier. It was a woman, draped in red robes, holding a staff topped with a glowing red crystal. A high priestess. "Halt!" the priestess intoned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in their bones. Caspian narrowed his eyes. "You have no business here, priestess." "The goddess speaks," the priestess said, pointing a withered finger directly at Alara. "She says there is a thief in your midst, King Storm, one who stole the silver light." Alara's heart stopped. They knew. The banquet that followed the council meeting was a suffocating affair. While Valerius was locked away, the nobility remained, buzzing with gossip. The high priestess's cryptic accusation hung over the room like a guillotine blade. Caspian had dismissed the priestess, calling her a charlatan, but he hadn't missed the way Alara had gone pale. He sat at the head table, Alara seated to his right, a position reserved for a queen. The insult to the nobles was deliberate. Caspian was challenging them to object. But his mind wasn't on politics. It was on the woman beside him. She wasn't eating. Her hand gripped the stem of her goblet so hard her knuckles were white. "The priestess is a fanatic," Caspian said quietly, leaning toward her. "Do not let her words frighten you." "She saw me," Alara whispered, staring into her wine. "She looked right through me." "What did she see, Alara?" Caspian asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What is the silver light?" Alara looked up at him. She wanted to tell him. The bond between them was pulling at her, urging her to submit, to trust, to bare her throat and her soul to him, but trust had always gotten her hurt. "I don't know," she lied again. Caspian stared at her, disappointment flickering in his eyes. He knew she was lying. He could smell the deception. It smelled like sour milk amidst the sweetness of her scent. Suddenly, a scream rang out from the lower tables. A baron collapsed, foaming at the mouth, his skin turning black. Poison! Chaos erupted. Guards shouted, nobles scrambled over chairs. "Stay here," Caspian ordered Alara, rising from his throne. He moved into the crowd, his authority instantly creating a perimeter. "Healer, now!" But the baron was already dead. And then another noble fell, and another. "It's in the wine!" someone shrieked. Caspian spun around. Alara, she was holding her goblet. "Alara, drop it!" he roared. Alara froze. She hadn't drunk yet, but the liquid was touching her lips. Startled by his shout, she dropped the goblet. Red wine splashed over her white hands and the violet dress. But as the liquid hit her skin, something impossible happened. The wine hissed. Where it touched her skin, it didn't stain. It evaporated. A soft, silvery glow began to emanate from her hands. It wasn't the harsh lightning of the king. It was a gentle lunar light, cool and purifying. Alara stared at her hands in horror. The stress, the fear, the proximity to the elemental king. It had shattered her control. Her inner wolf, the silver wolf, was rising to purge the poison from the air. The glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat. The nobles closest to her stopped screaming. The man who had been convulsing on the floor suddenly gasped, his skin returning to a normal color. The silence that fell over the banquet hall was absolute. Alara stood there, glowing like a trapped star. "Silver," Lord Vane whispered, his face slack with awe and greed. "A silver omega." Caspian stood frozen in the crowd. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Silver omegas were myths. They were the direct descendants of the moon goddess, capable of healing any wound, curing any poison. They were extinct. Or so everyone thought. If she was a silver omega, she was the most valuable creature in the world. Packs would slaughter entire kingdoms to possess her. She wasn't just a mate, she was a miracle. And she had been scrubbing his floors. The high priestess, who had been lurking in the shadows, stepped forward, her eyes manic. "Witch!" She steals the goddess's power! Seize her! No, Alara cried, backing away, the light flaring brighter with her panic. Guards hesitated, unsure whether to obey the priestess or the king. Seize her! Lord Vane shouted. She is a national treasure. She belongs to the state. The room surged forward, a tidal wave of greedy hands reaching for the glowing girl. Enough! The roar didn't come from a throat. It came from the sky. The roof of the great hall was ripped away, not by wind, but by a massive bolt of lightning that disintegrated the stone and timber in a blinding flash. Debris rained down, bouncing off a shimmering dome of electricity that had formed around Alara. Caspian stood before her, his body transformed. He was wreathed in lightning, his eyes solid white balls of energy. The floor beneath him melted into glass. He looked at the mob of nobles, at Lord Vane, at the priestess. She belongs. Caspian's voice was a boom of thunder that shook the marrow of their bones. To me. He turned to Alara, who was weeping silently, her glow fading in the presence of his overwhelming power. He reached through the lightning, his hand steady, and cupped her face. I told you, he said, his voice dropping to a rough human whisper amidst the storm. No one touches you. He scooped her up into his arms. Burn it, he commanded the storm. A second bolt of lightning struck the long tables, setting the banquet hall ablaze. A wall of fire separated the king and the Omega from the court. Caspian didn't look back. He carried her through the flames, through the destruction he had wrought, walking away from his kingdom, his council, and his sanity. He had just started a civil war. He had just declared war on the world. And looking down at the silver-haired girl in his arms, he didn't regret a single second of it. The world was a blur of wind and snow. Caspian moved faster than a galloping horse, carrying Alara wrapped tight in his cloak as he ascended the treacherous peaks of the Storm Mountains. He didn't stop until they reached the Storm Spire, an ancient abandoned fortress carved into the highest jagged peak, a place where the air was thin and the lightning struck the stone as a greeting. He kicked open the heavy iron doors, carrying her into the freezing darkness of the main hall. With a wave of his hand, the dormant hearths roared to life, not with orange wood fire, but with blue, crackling, magical flame. He set her down gently on a dusty fur rug before the fire. He was panting, sweat freezing on his brow. The use of such catastrophic power back at the palace had drained him. His skin was gray, veins of black tracing his neck where the elemental magic had burned him. You're hurt, Alara whispered, reaching out. Her fear was gone, replaced by the crushing realization that he had burned his own kingdom to save her. It is nothing, Caspian grunted, leaning against a stone pillar. Just the price of the storm. Let me, she said. It wasn't a question. She crawled towards him, her hands glowing with that soft lunar light. She placed her palms on his chest. Caspian hissed, his muscles seizing, but then he sighed, a sound of pure relief. The black veins receded. The gray returned to a healthy flush. Her magic was cool water to his raging fire. He caught her wrists, stopping her before she drained herself. Enough! You are too weak. I am stronger than you think, she countered, looking up at him. For a moment there was no king, no Omega, just a man and a woman in a stone tower at the top of the world. Why did you hide it? Caspian asked, his voice rough. A silver Omega. You could have been a queen anywhere. You chose to be a servant. I chose to be alive, Alara said, pulling her hands back. My pack, the Moonstone Pack. They didn't die in the war, Caspian. They were hunted by alphas who wanted to breed the magic into their own bloodlines. My mother hid me. She told me that if I ever showed my light, I would become a prisoner in a gilded cage. Caspian's eyes darkened. Is that what you think I am doing? Putting you in a cage? You locked me in a tower, she pointed out gently. Caspian let out a dry, bitter laugh. He slid down the pillar to sit on the floor, pulling her into the space between his legs, wrapping his arms around her waist. It was possessive, yes, but it was also desperate. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of winter stars. I locked you here because the world isn't ready for you, he murmured against her neck. And because if anyone tries to take you from me again, I will not just burn a hall, I will burn the continent. Alara leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. She realized then that the bond wasn't a chain. It was an anchor. For the first time in her life, she wasn't drifting in the dark. She was home. "They will come," she whispered. "Valerius, the priestess, Lord Vane." "Let them come," Caspian said, his eyes closing. "Let them break themselves against the mountain." Caspian was right. They came. 3 days later, the horizon turned black with soldiers. Valerius had not been idle. Freed from the tower by the corrupt High Council and the fanatic priestess, he had spun a tale of a mad king bewitched by a sorceress. He had rallied the Golden Legion, 10,000 strong. They marched up the winding mountain pass, a snake of steel and torches. From the balcony of the Spire, Caspian watched them. He was fully armored now, in ancient plate mail he had found in the armory, wielding a great sword that hummed with electricity. 10,000, Alara said, standing beside him. She wore a tunic of white leather and silver chainmail, armor fit for a warrior, not a maid. "Against one." "Against two," Caspian corrected. He looked at her. "Stay inside the wards. If they breach the gate, you run. You run to the northern pass and you don't look back." "I am done running," Alara said, her violet eyes hardening. Below, a horn blasted. Valerius rode to the front of the lines on a white stallion, shouting up at the fortress. "Father!" Valerius's voice was amplified by magic. "Give up the witch, surrender the crown, and I will let you live in exile. Refuse, and I will tear this mountain down stone by stone." Caspian didn't shout back. He simply stepped off the balcony. He fell 300 feet, landing amidst the vanguard with the force of a meteor. The impact shockwave threw 100 soldiers into the air. The battle for the storm spire had begun. It was a massacre. Caspian was a whirlwind of death. Lightning arched from his blade, chaining between soldiers, frying them in their armor. He moved with supernatural speed, a blur of black steel and blue light. But there were too many. For every soldier he struck down, 3 more took their place, and they had brought help. The high priestess stood on a ridge overlooking the battle. She raised her red crystal staff and began to chant. A dark crimson fog rolled down the mountain. When the fog touched Caspian, he stumbled. His lightning flickered and died. The fog was blood magic, ancient, forbidden, and specifically designed to sever an elemental's connection to nature. "Now!" Valerius screamed. "Bring him down!" Dozens of soldiers threw harpoons attached to heavy chains. The hooks bit into Caspian's armor, piercing the gaps. He roared, trashing, but the weight of 50 men dragged him to his knees. "Father!" Valerius rode closer, drawing his sword. "Look at you! Captured like a rogue bear!" Caspian spat blood, his eyes burning with defiance. "You are no king, boy. You are a puppet." "I am the one holding the sword," Valerius sneered. He raised the blade for the executioner's stroke. The blade whistled down, seeking the king's neck, but it never made contact. Instead, it collided with a barrier of solid iridescent moonlight. The sound was not of metal striking metal, but of a hammer hitting a bell, a pure, resonant tone that vibrated in the teeth of every man on the mountain. Valerius's sword didn't just break, it disintegrated. Shards of steel turned to diamond dust in the air. The shockwave of the impact bucked the white stallion, throwing the prince into the mud. Silence fell. A silence so profound it swallowed the wind. The heavy iron doors of the storm spire groaned open, not by hand, but by will. Alara Moonstone stepped out. She was no longer the girl who scrubbed floors. She was no longer the terrified fugitive. She was an avatar of the celestial. Her feet did not touch the blood-stained snow. She hovered inches above it, suspended by gravity that bowed to her whim. Her hair was a river of liquid silver, flowing behind her as if caught in an underwater current. Her eyes, once a soft violet, were now blinding orbs of white fire. Where she passed, the crimson blood fog hissed and recoiled, evaporating like steam on a hot griddle. The air around her smelled of ozone and blooming night flowers, the scent of purification. The witch! The high priestess shrieked from the ridge, her voice cracking with terror. She consumes the world. Kill her before she takes your souls. The archers, drilled by fear, loosed a volley of 1,000 arrows. The sky darkened with the swarm of shafts. Alara did not flinch. She simply raised her chin. As the arrows entered the radius of her silver aura, wood turned to silk. Steel tips turned to soft petals. A rain of white lilies fell upon the vanguard, harmless and fragrant. The soldiers lowered their bows, their hands shaking. This was not witchcraft. Witchcraft was cold, witchcraft was blood. This felt like forgiveness. Alara raised her hands, palms open to the sky. She didn't attack. She didn't destroy. She pulsed. A shock wave of pure silver energy exploded outward from her center. It wasn't a force of impact, but a force of truth. It passed through the bodies of the 10,000 men like a ghost. It didn't hurt them. Instead, it burned away the red haze in their minds. It incinerated the lies Valerius had fed them. It washed away the artificial rage the priestess had cooked in her cauldron of hate. Men dropped their weapons. Some fell to their knees, weeping as the clarity returned, realizing they were standing on a mountain to kill their true king. The Golden Legion ceased to be an army. They became men again. The heavy iron chains binding Caspian turned to gray dust, crumbling away from his armor. The king stood up. The blood magic that had severed him from the storm was gone, purged by the silver light. He took a deep breath, and the sky answered. Thunder rumbled, not the angry crash of battle, but the deep, loyal growl of a beast returning to its master. His eyes ignited, turning a solid, terrifying electric blue. He looked at Alara, hovering like a star come to earth. A look of fierce, devastating pride crossed his scarred face. Then, he looked at his son. Valerius was scrambling backward in the mud, his fine armor stained, his face a mask of primal terror. He reached for a discarded dagger, his ambition still twitching like a severed nerve. Caspian walked toward him. The ground didn't shake. It seemed to solidify under his boots. "Father," Valerius gibbered, backing up until he hit the wheel of a supply wagon. The priestess, she used mind control." "She amplified what was already there," Caspian said, his voice terrifyingly soft. "Greed, envy, a hollow heart." Caspian reached down. Valerius flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, Caspian placed his large hand gently over his son's forehead. "You wanted to be a king," Caspian murmured, the electricity dancing between his fingers. "But a king must serve. You only wish to take. I cannot allow you to take any more." A single jolt, precise, surgical, and permanent, snapped from Caspian's palm. It didn't kill the boy. It burned out the neural pathways of aggression. It severed the connection to the wolf's dominance. Valerius's eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward, unconscious. When he woke, he would be simple. He would be peaceful. He would never hold a sword or a grudge again. Caspian turned his gaze to the ridge. The high priestess was scrambling up the rocks, her red robes flapping like the wings of a dying bird. Caspian raised one hand to the heavens. He didn't shout. He didn't chant. "Judgment," he whispered. The clouds tore open. A single pillar of blinding blue light descended. It was instantaneous. There was no explosion, only the sound of the air clapping shut. When the spots cleared from everyone's eyes, the ridge was empty. The priestess and the rock she stood on had been vaporized. The battle was over. Alara began to descend. The silver light flickered, then faded, leaving her gasping for air. Her legs gave out. Caspian was there before she hit the ground. He caught her, pulling her against his chest armor, heedless of the mud or the eyes of 10,000 men. "You saved me," he rasped, burying his face in her neck, shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline. "We saved each other," she whispered, her hand finding his cheek. Around them, the sound of metal hitting stone rang out. One by one, then, in waves, the soldiers threw down their weapons. They fell to one knee, heads bowed low. "Long live the king!" a captain shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. "Long live the queen!" another cried, and the chant echoed off the mountains, louder than any thunder. The reign of King Caspian, and Queen Alara became known as the Silver Age. It was not an age of fear, but of balance. The storm and the moon ruled together. Valerius lived out his days in a monastery, stripped of his titles, finding a quiet peace he never found in power. The laws were rewritten. Omegas were no longer servants, but cherished partners. The glass ceiling of the hierarchy was shattered, not by a fist, but by a light that refused to be hidden. Years later, on the anniversary of the battle, Caspian would often find Alara on the balcony of the restored palace, looking at the moon. He would wrap his arms around her, the fiercest alpha the world had ever known, tamed only by the woman who held the stars in her hands. "Do you regret it?" he would ask, "the quiet life you lost?" Alara would lean back against him, smiling. "I never wanted quiet, Caspian. I wanted to be heard, and in the arms of the storm, she finally was." If you love this story of power, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic tales. The moon is always watching. Make sure your story is one worth telling.